Have you ever wondered how a single government decision can wipe out $100 billion from the global economy overnight? On June 29th, 2020, India did exactly that when they banned 59 Chinese apps, including the massively popular TikTok. But this wasn't just about national security or border tensions. This was the opening move in what would become one of the most fascinating economic chess matches of the 21st century. What happened next would reshape the entire global app ecosystem, create unexpected winners and losers, and reveal an economic strategy so bold that other nations are now copying it. Today, we're diving deep into the real story behind India's app ban, the shocking economic consequences that followed, and why this move might have been the smartest strategic decision India has made in decades. But first, let me paint you a picture of just how dominant Chinese apps were in India before this ban. TikTok alone had over 200 million users in India, making it the app's largest market globally. Chinese apps weren't just popular in India, they were absolutely dominating. WeChat Pay was processing billions in transactions, UC Browser was the second most used browser, and apps like PUBG Mobile were generating hundreds of millions in revenue. The scale was mind-blowing. Chinese companies had essentially created a parallel digital economy within India, and the numbers were staggering. TikTok was adding roughly 1 million new Indian users every single week. The app ecosystem was so entrenched that many small businesses had built their entire marketing strategy around these platforms. Then came the Galwan Valley clash. On June 15th, 2020, Indian and Chinese soldiers engaged in their deadliest border confrontation in 45 years. 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives, and the public outcry was immediate and intense. But here's where the story gets interesting, because the government's response wasn't just emotional, it was calculated. Within 2 weeks of the border clash, India announced the ban on 59 Chinese apps, citing national security concerns. The official statement mentioned that these apps were engaged in activities prejudicial to sovereignty, integrity, defense, and security of the country. But if you look deeper into the timing and implementation, you'll see this was far more strategic than it appeared. The government had been quietly preparing for this moment for months. Intelligence agencies had been monitoring data flows, cybersecurity experts had been analyzing app permissions, and economic advisors had been calculating the potential impact. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It was a carefully orchestrated economic maneuver disguised as a security response. Let's talk about what happened in those first 24 hours after the ban was announced. The immediate chaos was unprecedented. 200 million TikTok users suddenly couldn't access their favorite app. Content creators who had built massive followings and income streams watched their livelihoods disappear overnight. Small businesses that relied on TikTok for marketing scrambled to find alternatives. But here's the fascinating part: the Indian government was ready for this. They had already begun reaching out to domestic app developers weeks before the announcement. They had prepared infrastructure to handle the massive surge in users that would flock to Indian alternatives. They had even coordinated with telecom companies to ensure network stability during the transition. The economic impact was immediate and brutal for Chinese companies. ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, lost an estimated $15 billion in valuation within the first month. Other Chinese tech giants saw similar drops. Tencent, Alibaba, and dozens of smaller companies watched years of investment in the Indian market evaporate. But the real genius of this strategy wasn't in what it destroyed, it was in what it created. Within weeks of the ban, Indian app downloads surged by over 300%. Homegrown platforms like Chingari, Mitron, and Josh suddenly found themselves with millions of new users. The Indian government had essentially forced a massive migration from foreign apps to domestic alternatives. Investment patterns shifted almost immediately. Venture capital that had been flowing to Chinese startups looking to expand into India suddenly pivoted to Indian companies. In the 6 months following the ban, Indian app startups raised over $2 billion in funding, much of it from investors who had previously focused on Chinese companies. The employment impact was equally dramatic. While thousands of Indians working for Chinese app companies lost their jobs initially, the domestic app industry began hiring aggressively. New positions were created not just in development and design, but in content moderation, regional marketing, and customer support specifically tailored for Indian users. Let's examine some specific success stories that emerged from this chaos. Take Chingari, an Indian short video platform that was struggling with just a few thousand users before the TikTok ban. Within 3 months, they had over 50 million downloads and were processing millions of videos daily. Their valuation jumped from essentially zero to over $100 million. Similarly, Josh, backed by Verse Innovation, went from being an unknown platform to having over 77 million monthly active users. These weren't just copying TikTok's features, they were innovating specifically for Indian audiences with regional language support, local creator programs, and culturally relevant content categories. The gaming sector saw even more dramatic changes. After PUBG Mobile was banned, Indian gaming companies like Encore Games released FAUG, which gained millions of downloads despite being a completely different type of game. The success wasn't just about filling a void, it was about proving that Indian developers could create world-class products when given the opportunity. But the strategy went far beyond just banning apps. The Indian government simultaneously launched initiatives like the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, promoting self-reliance in technology. They increased funding for startup incubators, created tax incentives for domestic app developers, and established fast-track approval processes for Indian tech companies. The data localization requirements became stricter. Any app operating in India now had to store user data within the country and follow strict privacy guidelines. This wasn't just about security, it was about ensuring that the economic value generated by Indian users would benefit the Indian economy. International reactions were swift and telling. The United States, which had been considering similar moves against Chinese apps, accelerated their own investigations. The European Union began drafting stricter data protection requirements. Countries like Australia and Japan started reviewing their own app ecosystems for potential security risks. China's response revealed just how significant the economic impact was. Rather than retaliating immediately, Chinese officials began reaching out through diplomatic channels, trying to negotiate exceptions or modifications to the ban. The fact that they were willing to engage diplomatically rather than economically retaliate showed how much they valued the Indian market. The ripple effects extended far beyond apps. Chinese smartphone manufacturers like Xiaomi and OnePlus, who relied heavily on their app ecosystems to differentiate their products, suddenly found themselves at a disadvantage. Indian consumers began questioning not just Chinese apps, but Chinese hardware as well. Local manufacturing got a massive boost. Companies that had been assembling Chinese-designed products in India began investing in original design and development. The Make in India initiative, which had struggled to gain traction in the tech sector, suddenly had concrete examples of successful domestic alternatives. The timing of additional bans revealed the strategic nature of this approach. In September 2020, India banned 118 more Chinese apps. In November, another 43 apps were blocked. Each wave was carefully timed to maximize economic disruption while giving Indian alternatives time to scale up. By early 2021, the economic transformation was undeniable. Indian app companies had captured market share worth an estimated $20 billion that had previously gone to Chinese companies. Employment in the Indian tech sector had increased by over 15%, with much of the growth concentrated in app development and digital services. The success created a virtuous cycle. As Indian apps gained users and revenue, they could invest more in features and user experience. This led to better products, which attracted more users, which generated more revenue. Within 18 months, several Indian apps had reached feature parity with their banned Chinese competitors. International investors took notice. Silicon Valley venture capital firms that had been hesitant to invest in Indian consumer apps suddenly saw massive opportunities. The total foreign investment in Indian app companies doubled in 2021 compared to 2019. with much of the increase coming from funds that had previously focused on Chinese startups. The talent migration was equally significant. Engineers and designers who had been working for Chinese companies in India either joined domestic startups or launched their own companies. This brain drain from foreign companies to Indian ones accelerated innovation and improved the overall quality of domestic apps. Government policy evolved to support this transition. New digital infrastructure initiatives were launched, including improved payment systems specifically designed for Indian apps. The unified payments interface was enhanced to work seamlessly with domestic platforms, giving them advantages over international competitors. The education sector saw unexpected benefits. As Indian apps gained prominence, computer science programs began teaching development specifically for the Indian market. Students who might have aspired to work for American or Chinese tech giants began targeting domestic companies instead. Regional language support became a key differentiator. While Chinese apps had offered basic Hindi support, Indian developers created sophisticated regional language features that Chinese companies had never prioritized. This allowed domestic apps to penetrate markets in smaller cities and rural areas more effectively. The advertising ecosystem underwent a complete transformation. Brands that had been spending millions on Chinese platforms suddenly had budgets available for Indian alternatives. This influx of advertising revenue allowed domestic apps to invest aggressively in user acquisition and feature development. Content creator economics changed dramatically. While many creators initially lost income when TikTok was banned, new monetization opportunities emerged on Indian platforms. Some creators who had struggled to generate significant revenue on TikTok found more lucrative opportunities on domestic alternatives. The privacy and data security improvements were substantial. Indian apps, operating under stricter government oversight, implemented better user protection measures than many of their Chinese predecessors. This wasn't just compliance, it was a competitive advantage that built user trust. Supply chain effects extended beyond apps into hardware and infrastructure. Indian companies that had been dependent on Chinese suppliers began developing domestic alternatives or diversifying to suppliers from other countries. This reduced strategic dependence while creating new economic opportunities. The success inspired similar policies in other sectors. India began reviewing Chinese involvement in telecommunications, manufacturing, and financial services. The app ban had proven that strategic economic policies could successfully reduce foreign dependence while boosting domestic industry. By 2023, the transformation was complete. Indian apps dominated categories where Chinese apps had once been leaders. The domestic app economy was generating over $30 billion annually, much of which had previously flowed to Chinese companies. Employment in the sector had more than doubled. The geopolitical implications became clear. Other countries began studying India's approach as a model for reducing dependence on Chinese technology while building domestic capabilities. The strategy had proven that economic nationalism could be implemented successfully in the digital age. Long-term sustainability required continued innovation. Indian app companies couldn't simply replicate Chinese features forever. They needed to develop unique capabilities and expand internationally. Many began this process, with several Indian apps gaining significant user bases in other emerging markets. The network effects proved crucial. As more Indians used domestic apps, these platforms became more valuable to both users and advertisers. This created natural barriers to entry for foreign competitors and sustainable competitive advantages for Indian companies. Looking at the broader economic impact, the app ban catalyzed a transformation that extended far beyond mobile applications. It demonstrated how strategic government policy could reshape entire industries while maintaining democratic principles and market economics. The success metrics were impressive across every dimension. User engagement with Indian apps reached levels comparable to the banned Chinese alternatives. Revenue generation exceeded expectations. Employment growth surpassed government targets. International recognition of Indian app companies increased dramatically. Today, as we look back at this economic strategy, its brilliance becomes clear. India didn't just ban Chinese apps out of anger or nationalism. They orchestrated a comprehensive economic transition that strengthened domestic capabilities while reducing strategic vulnerabilities. The $100 billion impact wasn't just what was lost by Chinese companies. It was what was gained by the Indian economy. This case study offers lessons for any country looking to build domestic tech capabilities while managing foreign competition. The key wasn't just restriction, but the simultaneous creation of alternatives and support systems that could succeed in the marketplace. The Indian app ban of 2020 will be remembered as one of the most successful examples of economic nationalism in the digital age. It proved that, with careful planning and strategic execution, countries can reduce foreign dependence while building globally competitive domestic industries. And for India, it was just the beginning of a broader economic transformation that continues to shape the global technology landscape today.